A man died in front of Edgar Cayce, and he described what he saw leave. For 70 years, that interview was locked away, not because it was unscientific, but because what Cayce described is now being measured in hospitals. Researchers have recorded sudden drops in body weight at the moment of death. Electromagnetic sensors have captured unexplained energy bursts, leaving the brain seconds after the heart stops. And Cayce, in 1944, told an interviewer exactly where to look and exactly what would register on instruments that didn't exist yet. If this is new to you, subscribe now. What comes next explains why they buried it. The interview was conducted 3 months before Cayce died. He was exhausted, recovering from his 209th reading of the week, and the reporter, a man named Thomas Agrew, a skeptic and former war correspondent, asked him a question no one had dared ask on record. What did you actually see when someone dies? Cayce didn't hesitate. He said, I see a silver mist, and it pulls up from the solar plexus first, not the head. Then he said something stranger. He said the mist doesn't leave all at once. It disconnects in stages like a plant being uprooted. The small roots let go first, then the deeper ones. And the last thing to release, he said, is a thin cord of light that snaps near the base of the skull. Agrew wrote it all down, but the transcript was never published in Cayce's lifetime. After his death in 1945, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the organization that manages legacy, placed the interview in a restricted archive. The official reason given was that the material was too sensitive for public interpretation. The real reason, according to a leaked memo from 1952, was that a team of physicians had begun testing Cayce's descriptions in terminal wards, and what they were finding was making them nervous. By 1963, a doctor in Massachusetts named Duncan McDougall had already published his infamous study claiming the human body loses 21 grams at the moment of death. His methodology was criticized, his sample size was tiny, but his core observation was never disproven. Something measurable leaves the body. McDougall didn't know about Cayce. He didn't mention light or mist or cords, but his timing was exact. The weight drop happened within seconds of the final heartbeat. Just as Cayce said, the mist begins to pull. Then, in 1975, a cardiologist in London named Sam Parnia began studying near-death experiences in cardiac arrest patients. He noticed something unusual. Patients who were revived reported seeing themselves from above, but not immediately. They described a delay, a moment of blackness, then a sudden jolt upward. Parnia measured the brain. He found that 7 seconds after the heart stops, the brain releases a final, massive surge of electrical activity. It's called the wave of death, and it moves from the brainstem up through the cortex. Cayce had described it as the mist rising through the body, beginning at the solar plexus and ending at the crown. He was off by one organ, or maybe he was seeing the same event from a different angle. The cord, though, the silver cord Cayce mentioned, that's where it gets disturbing. Because in 1994, a team of neurologists in Switzerland published a study on the pineal gland. They found that in the minutes following death, the pineal releases a massive dose of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, the same chemical that produces visions of tunnels, light, and geometric patterns. The release is so concentrated that if you could extract it, a single human pineal at death would contain more DMT than a living person produces in a lifetime. The study noted one other thing. The release follows a thread-like pathway along the spine, terminating near the occiput, the base of the skull, exactly where Cayce said the cord snaps. The interview resurfaced briefly in 1982 during a symposium on consciousness at the University of Virginia. A researcher named Bruce Grayson presented a slideshow comparing Cayce's 1944 statements with contemporary findings in terminal neurology. The similarities were so precise that 3 attendees accused Grayson of fabricating the Cayce material. He provided the original transcript. 2 weeks later, the university quietly withdrew funding from Grayson's lab. No explanation was given. The transcript went back into the archive. But here's the contradiction no one expected. In 2007, a physicist named Sir Roger Penrose and an anesthesiologist named Stuart Hameroff published a theory called orchestrated objective reduction. It proposed that consciousness isn't produced by the brain. It's hosted by quantum structures inside neurons, and at death, that information doesn't disappear. It leaks into the surrounding field. Penrose didn't reference Cayce, but he described the process in terms that mirror the mist, a quantum coherence that collapses outward, not inward, at the moment of biological failure. And he suggested it would be detectable not as mass, but as a localized distortion in space-time. In 2011, a team in Germany tried to detect it. They placed ultra-sensitive gravitational sensors around the beds of hospice patients and recorded the moments of death. In 14 out of 19 cases, they measured a brief spike in gravitational lensing, a warping effect consistent with a small, sudden mass leaving the immediate area. The effect lasted less than 3 seconds. It moved upward, and it appeared to originate not from a brain, but from the center of the torso. The study was retracted 6 months later. The stated reason was calibration error. But one of the co-authors, a physicist named Hermann Weyl, released a statement saying the retraction was not scientific. It was institutional. He said the sensors worked perfectly. He said the data was clean. And he said the only reason the paper was pulled was because no one wanted to be the team that proved the soul has weight and direction. Now go back to Cayce. In the same 1944 interview, Segru asked him if the silver mist could be photographed. Cayce said no, not with light. But he said it could be measured with magnetism. He said the mist produces a field distortion, like heat rising off pavement, and that if you placed a magnetometer near the body of death, you'd see the needle swing. In 2016, researchers at the University of Southampton did exactly that. They weren't testing Cayce. They were studying cellular electromagnetic discharge in brain-dead patients. But they recorded something unexpected. At the moment the EEG flatlined, a handheld magnetometer in the room spiked for 4 seconds, then dropped to 0. The spike was directional. It pointed up. They ran the test 16 more times. It happened in 12 of them. The team published a brief note in a neurology journal, then went silent. No follow-up studies. No interviews. One of the researchers, when contacted privately, said only this: "We measured it. We don't know what to do with that." The transcript itself has now been digitized. It's available, technically, through a Freedom of Information request filed against the Association for Research and Enlightenment in 2003. But the file is listed under a medical research classification, not historical archives, which means most search engines won't index it. You have to know it exists to find it. And even then, the document you receive is partial. 3 pages are redacted. The redactions cover Cayce's answers to 2 questions. What do you see in the moment before the mist forms? And what happens to people who die in violence or fear? The official reason given for the redaction is patient privacy. But every patient Cayce described in that interview has been dead for more than 70 years. In 2018, a bioengineer named Michael Persinger published a paper on electromagnetic fields and consciousness. He proposed that memory, identity, and subjective experience are encoded not in neural matter, but in standing wave patterns that extend slightly beyond the skull. He called it the electromagnetic soul hypothesis. He said that at death, the field doesn't vanish. It dissipates like smoke, and under the right conditions, it could be captured or even reconstituted. Persinger died in 2018, the same year the paper was published. The research was never continued. But a single line from his conclusion has been quoted in 14 subsequent studies. If consciousness is field-based, then the transition we call death is not an end. It is a relocation. Cayce used different words. He said the mist doesn't disappear. He said it lifts into what he called the etheric plane, a layer of reality that interpenetrates physical space but vibrates faster. He said the silver cord acts like an anchor, and when it snaps, the mist is free to move, but not randomly. He said it moves toward something, the way metal filings move toward a magnet. He said the dying person doesn't lose awareness. They gain it. And he said the moment the cord breaks is not the worst part. The worst part is the moment just before, when the person realizes the cord is thinning and tries to hold on. Segru asked him, "Do they feel pain?" Cayce said no. He said they feel something closer to grief. The body is a home, and leaving it, even when the body is broken, feels like betrayal. There's no scientific term for that. But in 2012, a palliative care nurse in Oregon named Penny Sartori published a study on the psychological experiences of dying patients. She interviewed people who had been resuscitated after clinical death. More than 60% reported the same thing, a feeling of immense sadness, not for themselves, but for the body they were leaving behind. One patient said it felt like abandoning a friend. Another said it felt like watching your house burn and knowing you'll never go back inside. Sartori didn't know about Cayce either, but she recorded something else. She said that in the seconds before death, many patients turned their eyes upward, not toward the ceiling, but toward a point slightly above and behind their own heads, as if they were watching something rise. The interview ends abruptly. Sugrú's final question was, "Have you ever seen someone refuse to let the cord snap?" Cayce's answer is one sentence, and it's the only part of the transcript that wasn't redacted. He said, "Yes," and they stay in the room. In 2020, a team of neurologists in Japan published findings on anomalous electromagnetic signatures in hospital rooms where patients had recently died. They found that in certain rooms, always rooms where death had been sudden or traumatic, magnetometers picked up low-frequency oscillations that persisted for up to 96 hours. The oscillations had no identifiable source. They weren't coming from equipment. They weren't coming from the building's wiring. They were localized to a 3-foot radius around the place where the bed had been, and they only appeared in rooms where the patient had died with eyes open. The study was published in an obscure journal. It's been cited twice. Now consider this. Every major hospital in the United States has a policy for handling rooms where patients die. The policies vary, but they share one detail. After death, the room is sealed for a minimum of 2 hours before cleaning crews enter. The official reason is infection control, but infection control protocols require only 30 minutes of UV sterilization. The extra 90 minutes are listed under a different classification, environmental stabilization. No hospital will explain what that means, but staff nurses know. They call it the waiting period. They won't say what they're waiting for, but they know not to enter early. Cayce said the silver cord takes between 1 and 3 hours to fully detach in cases of natural death. In cases of sudden death, he said it can take longer because the consciousness doesn't expect the separation and holds on harder. He said you can feel it if you enter the room too soon. He said it feels like walking into a spiderweb you can't see. No hospital has ever confirmed testing Cayce's timeline, but the 2-hour rule is universal. The interview was recorded on a wire spool. The original spool was stored in a fireproof safe at the association's headquarters in Virginia Beach. In 1991, during a routine audit, staff discovered the safe had been opened. The spool was gone. No one had signed it out. No theft was reported. Security logs showed no entry. The transcript survived only because Sugrú had made a typed carbon copy before returning the spool. That copy is what exists today. Whoever took the original knew what they were looking for. In 2003, a documentary filmmaker named Jeffrey Mishlove interviewed the last surviving member of the team that had placed the interview under restriction. The man was 91 years old, bedridden, and still refused to give his name. But he said this: "We didn't lock it away because we thought it was false. We locked it away because we knew it was true, and we didn't know what people would do with that." Mishlove asked him, "What did you think they would do?" The man said they'd try to stay. Cayce himself never elaborated publicly, but in a private letter to his son, Hugh Lynn Cayce, written 2 weeks before his death, he said something that didn't make sense at the time. He said, "When I go, don't try to call me back. I've seen what happens when people try. The ones who love the most hold them in place, and they can't finish the turn." He said the worst hauntings aren't malicious. They're just people who couldn't let go because someone else wouldn't let them. The letter is in the archive. It's not redacted. So here's what we know. A man with no medical training described a process that takes 3 seconds, releases measurable energy, follows a specific anatomical path, and leaves a detectable field distortion. He described it in 1944. We measured it in 2011. And the only reason you haven't heard about it is because the people who measured it chose not to tell you. Not because it's not real, because it is. And if the mist is real, then the cord is real. And if the cord is real, then Cayce's final warning is real too. The one Sugrú never asked him to clarify. The one that ends the transcript with no follow-up. Yes, and they stay in the room. You've walked into empty hospital rooms before. You've felt the ones that don't feel empty. Now, you know why.